Hi, I'm Donnesha Robinson, and my two words are anxious and trusting. I grew up with a family who believed in God and two parents who were great examples of how to live for Christ. I knew growing up that Jesus died for my sins and so that I might have a relationship with Him. And I went to church every Sunday, and I knew all the famous verses and the answers to the questions because of my parents. And I loved God, and I still do. And so as I got into middle school, I started doing a Bible study, and it really encouraged me and how great the Lord was and still is. And I also did Student Venture, which is a Christian club, and it all just helped me know more about God. But it wasn't until high school when I began to really see who God is. And so I began to read my Bible. And I know what you're thinking, like, wow, she's a Christian. She hasn't read her Bible before. But it wasn't just reading my Bible, but it was actually analyzing and understanding what God was trying to show me in it. And so as I began to read the book of John, I found that everything I read related to my current situations, whether it be at school or other activities, and I began to see God's word coming alive in my life. So one day I was at marching band practice, and we saw the storm coming in the distance, and it wasn't like your average drizzle, but it was like this huge downpour of rain. And so since our stadium's a little farther away from our school, people began to get in cars and drive down there, but they could only hold so many people. So I was just left there in the pouring rain, just waiting for another car to come by. And so by the time I got in the car and got up to the school, I was just drenched from head to toe. Like, my socks were wet, my shirt was wet, and I was so angry because I saw it coming, and I was like, why didn't we go inside? And so much frustration. And I complained to anyone and everyone who I was around me. And I was in such a bad mood, and I told everyone that it was the worst day of my life. And when my parents came to pick me up that evening, I told them the same story that happened to me. And I was just ranting on, and then my family, they were like, oh, well, do you want to hear how our day went? And I was like, sure. And then my dad told me that he'd been laid off. And, like, immediately I was filled with anxiety. And, like, words began to pop in my head, like, what are we going to do now? And how are we going to make it? And when I got home, I went into my room and I just cried. And it was because I had the audacity to even complain about the weather when my dad had to figure out how he was going to provide for his family. And so I needed to be comforted. And I knew that the only way to find it was in God and in His Word. And so I began to read the Bible, and afterward God showed me that I don't have to be anxious or worried about what's to come, but that I can trust in Him and that everything will work out. And when I went downstairs, I saw my family, and they were filled with joy, and they were laughing, and it, like, took me by surprise. But it comforted me so much. And it just showed me that how much they trusted in God, that they were able to rejoice in the middle of all that was going on. And I began just to pray that my dad would get a job, and so a month later, my grandma died, and that was my dad's mom, and just all of a sudden, all this anxiety came back, and it was like, oh, what are we going to do? And I just began to have all these questions, and I got really worried about, like, how just, like, my dad was feeling and everything. And so I just realized, I found comfort in God before I can find it again. So I went back in the Word, and I just found so much security in Ecclesiastes 3:4 that said, there's a time to mourn and a time to dance. And it just showed me, like, there's a time for everything. So it's not like this is just this crazy thing that happens to some people, but this will happen. And then there's also times that you will rejoice. And so it just gave me so much hope. And it just showed me that I didn't have to know all that was coming or have all the answers to the questions, but that I could trust in God and that everything would work out. And it did, because a month after that, my dad found a job, and I came to peace with my grandma's death, and it's just so amazing. And I thank God that He has always been a shining light in my life. And that doesn't mean that I've never gone through any struggles or that I'm perfect at all, but it just means that I can put my trust in Him. So those are my two words, anxious and trusting.